Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. The last human prisoner floated eerily within a cylindrical tube filled with bubbling suppression gel, his limbs drifting weightlessly like seaweed in a current. A necessary precaution after his 3 violent escape attempts had left 2 guards permanently disfigured. Izara stood before the glass, eyes narrow as he debated with Commander Ikzu, a battle-scarred Krydar veteran. The stubborn old warrior voiced his objections to deploying the human in the war, despite the High Council's unanimous approval just 3 hours ago. Izara nodded at appropriate intervals, feigning attentiveness to the veteran's concerns, but his focus had drifted to the strangeness of Ikzu's appearance. The old warrior's eyes glowed an unnatural amber, cybernetic replacements that had replaced the natural organ. Both of his arms were also artificial, the junction between synthetic material and flesh visible just below the shoulders. Metal and polymers crafted to mimic Krydar musculature, but failing to capture the subtle variations of genuine anatomy. The arms moved with mechanical stiffness, lacking the organic fluidity of natural limbs. Izara had never tasted the front lines of battle, and his unblemished body told that story with embarrassing clarity. His smooth, slate-grey skin bore no scars, no evidence of sacrifice or struggle. His eyes were the natural reflective black of their species, not the artificial glow that marked veterans who had given pieces of themselves to the war effort. The soft ridges that crowned his head remained symmetrical and elegant, never having been damaged in combat or hastily regenerated by field medics. Even his garments betrayed his status, flowing robes of expensive fabric that shifted from deep purple to midnight blue as he moved, adorned with the subtle circular patterns that marked his status in the bureaucracy. They were pristine, impractical for anything but moving through climate-controlled corridors and sitting in council chambers. He stood before a warrior marked by sacrifice and pain, wearing the uniform of someone who had never had to make difficult choices under fire. "Commander Ikzu," Izara said, clearing his throat to interrupt the veteran mid-sentence. "I understand your concerns. A warrior like yourself naturally prioritizes security and containment." He gestured toward the suspended human, whose pale skin appeared almost luminescent against the green suspension gel. "But with respect, you aren't aware of the full scope of our struggle against the Yadriks." The old commander's mechanical eyes narrowed, the amber glow intensifying. "Our best fleet captains cannot achieve more than 50% neural integration with our ship's systems," Izira continued, warming to his argument. "The High Council's biomechanical division has run the simulations 1,000 times. We need at least 80% integration to overcome the Yadrik hive formations." He tapped the glass tube with one long, grey finger. "This human is likely the only being capable of 100% integration. Without him, the war is already lost." Ikzu's artificial hands clenched, the metal joints creaking slightly. "I might not understand the full scope of your strategic dilemma, Administrator, but I understand how a warrior thinks." His voice carried the gravelly undertone of someone who had lived long and seen too much. "This human will never help us, not after what we did to his species." The veteran stepped closer to the suspension chamber, his artificial eyes reflecting in the glass. "We should deactivate the breathing system and let him die in the gel. It would be a mercy compared to what you're proposing." Heat flushed through Izira's facial ridges, a physiological response he couldn't control. "This is not open for discussion, Commander," he snapped, abandoning his diplomatic approach. "The Council has made its decision. This human will serve our needs in the coming battle." He straightened to his full height, nearly a head taller than the veteran. You're here for one reason only, to operate the assisted sleep chamber, a task suited for a low-ranking retired officer with technical skills, but clearly without the mental capacity to grasp larger strategic imperatives. Ixu's face remained impassive, betraying little reaction to the outburst. With a deliberate slowness, he reached down and removed his standard-issue military boots. Beneath them were not the three-toed feet of a Krydar, but cybernetic replacements, gleaming with the same metallic sheen as his arms.
"I was part of the squad that captured this human,"
Ixu said quietly, wiggling mechanical toes that clicked softly against the floor.
"We intercepted him, attempting to activate a communication beacon on the distant moon of Lomahir."
The veteran's gaze remained fixed on the floating human.
"He killed 5 of our finest warriors single-handedly. Did this to me."
He gestured at his cybernetic limbs.
"When we prevented him from completing whatever mission drove him to that desolate place."
Ixu placed a cold metal hand on Izira's shoulder, the grip firm enough to convey authority without being threatening.
"In the years of interrogation that followed, through methods I'm not proud to have witnessed, he never broke, never revealed his purpose."
The old warrior's voice dropped to nearly a whisper.
"If you believe you need this creature to save the galaxy, Administrator, then it would be better to accept defeat than to wake him."
Izira shrugged off the veteran's hand, the metal fingers catching momentarily in the delicate fabric of his robe. "The Council has prepared an offer the human cannot refuse," he hissed. "Now drain the gel and wake him. That is a direct order, issued under the authority of the High Council." For several tense moments, Ixu's amber eyes bored into Izira's natural black ones. Then, without a word, the veteran turned to the control panel beside the suspension chamber. His metal fingers reached for the interface, inputting the complex sequence that would begin the awakening process. The chamber emitted a low, resonant vibration as mechanisms deep within its base activated. The bubbling in the gel intensified, then began to diminish as pumps engaged. Slowly, the viscous blue-green fluid drained downward, revealing more of the human's pale form. As the gel level dropped below his face, the breathing apparatus around his mouth and nose became visible, a complex mask of tubes and filters that had sustained him through his long suspension. The human's body twitched as automatic systems began to stimulate his muscles, preventing atrophy during the awakening process. His fingers flexed spasmodically, then curled into tight fists. The last of the gel disappeared into the recycling system beneath the chamber, leaving him hanging from the suspension harness, dripping and vulnerable. Izira watched with fascination as the final automated sequence initiated. The breathing apparatus detached, revealing the human's full face, features sharper and more angular than Krydar physiology, with a prominent nose and strangely small ears. The suspension harness lowered him gently to the floor of the chamber. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with startling suddenness, the human's eyes snapped open, fierce, alert, and filled with a cold intelligence that sent an involuntary shiver down Izira's spine. 5 hours later, Izira sat across from the human in a stark interrogation room. Between them stretched a clean metal table, its surface reflecting the overhead lighting. The human sat with his wrist secured to a metal chair by electromagnetic restraints, a necessary precaution. Izira had insisted, despite the Council's optimism about cooperation. The room held little else, bare walls of reinforced composite material, a single door with a biometric lock, and surveillance devices hidden in each corner. Izira had ensured the human received a meal and the stimulant beverage his species preferred, a gesture of goodwill that the administrator hoped would facilitate cooperation. In his experience, kindness sometimes proved more effective than coercion, especially when dealing with intelligent subjects. Izira observed the human carefully, Up close, the differences between their species became more pronounced. The human's skin was a pale beige, covered in small imperfections and fine hairs. His body appeared deceptively fragile compared to Krydar physiology, lacking the protective ridges and reinforced skeletal structure that evolved on their harsher homeworld. Yet Izira knew from the reports that this apparent vulnerability masked exceptional resilience. The human lifted the steaming cup to his lips with his restrained hands, the chain between the cuffs clinking against the table. The rich, bitter aroma of the black liquid, coffee, according to the cultural archives, filled the small room. Izira had ordered it specifically, retrieved from a preservation chamber in the Krydar Museum of Extinct Civilizations. The silence between them had stretched for nearly 10 minutes. Izira decided it was time to break it. "Is our proposal sufficient to secure your cooperation?" he asked, leaning forward slightly, his robes rustling with the movement. The human took another sip, then grimaced.
"This coffee tastes like shit," he said, his voice rough from disuse.
The translator embedded in Izira's auditory canal rendered the alien language perfectly, including the crude metaphor. Izira remained unperturbed by the human's coarse language. "That is to be expected, given how long it has been preserved in the museum," he replied evenly. "But you haven't answered my question." The human set the cup down slowly.
"Restoring humanity and keeping us protected on a moon with technology restricted to pre-space flight level?"
He shook his head.
"Doesn't sound that appealing."
His eyes, a startling blue that reminded Izira of certain toxic minerals from their homeworld, narrowed.
"And most of all, I could never trust the Krydar after how you switched sides during the First Galactic War. Even if you paid the highest price when your new ally also betrayed you."
Izira had anticipated this response. The human's distrust was logical, given their species' history. "Everyone made mistakes in the First Galactic War," Izira said, spreading his hands in a gesture of conciliation. "Our species is not what it once was. We have evolved, learned from our past failures."
"Humanity's only mistake was trusting you,"
the human shot back, leaning forward as far as his restraints would allow.
"All we got for being good allies was the shorter end of the stick, while your kind saved themselves."
Izira felt his facial ridges flush again, but maintained his composure. "Bad decisions were made by my ancestors," he acknowledged, "and just like humanity, we have paid for those mistakes in blood." He gestured to the window that looked out over the sprawling Krydar capital city, where the scars of past conflicts remained visible even after centuries of rebuilding. "The Yadriks decimated our outer colonies after we aligned with them. They harvested millions for their hive expansion projects." The human stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable.
"Hard to trust someone who hasn't even asked my name,"
he finally said. Izira blinked twice in rapid succession, realizing his oversight. He quickly accessed his memory implant, retrieving the information from the prisoner file he had reviewed before the awakening. "I didn't ask because I already know," Izira replied smoothly. "Your designation in our records is Leonard Kethson, former pilot in the Human Alliance Defense Force, 2nd Special Tactics Division." A ghost of a smile crossed the human's face.
"Didn't think you'd know that."
"I know that, and more," Izira continued, seizing the opportunity to demonstrate the depth of Krydar knowledge. "I know you are the last verified living human in the galaxy, the final survivor of your kind." Leonard's expression hardened, but he remained silent. "What you may not know," Izira continued, "is that after humanity's departure from the galactic stage, our species never managed to achieve the same level of neural integration with ships that humans could accomplish. Despite billions of credits poured into research, some aspects of human neurology have proven impossible to replicate or synthesize." Izira leaned forward, lowering his voice as though sharing a confidence. "The High Council is confident that you can help us win the war against the Yadriks. In return, we offer the restoration of humanity as payment. All we ask is your assistance in controlling a portion of our fleet using the technology your species helped create centuries ago." Leonard stared into his coffee cup for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, he looked up. "I don't mind helping you kill a few bugs," he said, his voice flat. "But as the sole representative of my species, I'll say this now, rather than later. We can be allies this once, but we will never be friends." His eyes hardened. "And I'll want to renegotiate the terms when the war is over." Izira maintained his diplomatic smile, even as his thoughts raced. This human was a fool for revealing his intentions so easily, for not questioning how the Krydar would keep their end of the bargain. But his naivety was useful. It would make him easier to control. "Agreed," Izira said, inclining his head in a gesture of respect. "Those terms are acceptable to the High Council." 3 days later, Izira stood in the neural integration chamber of the Krydar flagship, Relentless Justice, watching with concealed astonishment as technicians prepared Leonard for his first connection attempt. The human sat in a contoured chair at the center of the circular room, surrounded by banks of equipment. The neural helmet, a complex apparatus of metallic filaments and bioconductive gel nodes, was being lowered onto his head by robotic arms. "The system has been calibrated to human neural patterns based on archived specifications," explained Chief Technician Zovri. "But honestly, Administrator, we're operating largely on theoretical models. No living being has achieved full integration with our fleet systems in over a century." Izira nodded absently, his attention fixed on the human. Leonard appeared calm, almost bored by the proceedings. Either he didn't understand the significance of what they were attempting, or he possessed nerves of exceptional steadiness. "Maximum integration achieved by our pilots is 53%, Zovri continued, checking readings on her control pad. "And that was Admiral Kelvox, who underwent extensive neural enhancement surgery." She glanced at Leonard with poorly disguised skepticism. "I've set the systems to begin at 20% integration and increase gradually. Any faster could cause—" 100%, Leonard interrupted, his voice carrying clearly across the chamber. Zovri blinked rapidly, her head ridges flushing deep purple with confusion. "I'm sorry?" "Set it to 100% integration," the human repeated calmly. "That's what you want, right? To see if I can handle it?" He shrugged. "No point wasting time with baby steps." The technician looked to Izira for guidance, clearly alarmed by the request. "Do as he says," Izira ordered after a moment's hesitation. If the human's neural system overloaded, they could always find another approach, and if he succeeded, well, that would vindicate the Council's decision and, more importantly, Izira's career gamble in supporting this project. With obvious reluctance, Zovri adjusted the settings. The equipment around them vibrated at a higher pitch as power diverted to the neural interfaces. The helmet completed its descent onto Leonard's head, locking into place at once. "Integration initiating," Zovri announced, her voice tight with tension. "Neural mapping sequence commencing." On the monitoring screens surrounding them, abstract visualizations of neural activity bloomed into complex, shifting patterns. Izira didn't understand the technical details, but even he could see that something extraordinary was happening. The patterns were orders of magnitude more complex than anything he'd observed in Krydar integration attempts. 20% integration achieved, Zovri reported, her professional demeanor giving way to astonishment. 30, 40, 50%! Leonard sat perfectly still, his eyes closed, breathing steady. No sign of distress. No indication of the immense computational load being placed on his brain. 65%! Zovri continued, her voice rising with each threshold crossed. 75! 85! The room had gone completely silent save for the technicians' count and the steady hum of the equipment. Even the junior technicians had abandoned their stations to watch. 95%, 98, 99. Izira held his breath. 100% integration achieved. Zovri's announcement was sudden and quiet, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the miracle they were witnessing. Leonard's eyes opened. For a moment they seemed unfocused, looking at something distant. Then his gaze sharpened, finding Izira.
I can feel the entire fleet, he said quietly. Every ship, every weapon system, every engine.
A small smile curved his lips.
It's like they're extensions of my own body.
Izira struggled to maintain his composure. Excellent, he managed. The Council will be most pleased. The test battle exceeded even the most optimistic projections. In a remote star system devoid of civilian traffic, Leonard controlled a squadron of 20 Krydar destroyers against a simulated Yadric attack force. What would normally have required 20 captains, 20 neural integration specialists, and hundreds of crew members, the human accomplished alone from his integration chair on the flagship. Izira watched the battle simulation from the command deck, surrounded by high-ranking officers whose initial skepticism quickly transformed into stunned silence. The human's control of the destroyers displayed a fluidity of movement and coordination that seemed impossible. Ships moved in perfect harmony, covering each other's vulnerabilities, focusing fire with devastating precision. The simulated Yadric forces, programmed with their actual battle tactics, were systematically dismantled in less than 30 minutes. Admiral Veklar, the fleet's most decorated officer, summed up the general reaction.
It's like watching a single organism with 20 bodies, rather than 20 ships acting in concert.
The High Council, viewing the test remotely, immediately authorized an expanded role for the human in the upcoming decisive battle. Leonard would control not 20, but 50 ships, a full third of the battle fleet, while Krydar officers commanded the remainder. The decision was unanimous and enthusiastic, with several council members suggesting even greater responsibilities for their human asset. Only Izira harbored private reservations, recalling Commander Ixu's warnings. But he kept these thoughts to himself. His career trajectory was now inextricably linked to the human's success. If Leonard helped them defeat the Yadrics, Izira would be elevated to the Council itself, the youngest member in 3 centuries. Such opportunity overshadowed any lingering doubts. 1 week later, Izira stood on the elevated command platform of the flagship Relentless Justice, watching the final preparations for battle. Below him, the bridge was busy as officers and specialists prepared for the coming conflict. At the center of it all, Leonard sat in his neural integration chair, the helmet connecting him to both the flagship and his designated portion of the fleet. Tactical displays surrounded them, painting a clear picture of the coming battlefield. The enemy shipyard, their target, glowing red on the main holographic projection, a massive structure embedded in a dense asteroid belt. The Krydar fleet, represented by green markers, approached in perfect formation. Leonard's 50 ships formed the vanguard, positioned to spearhead the assault. Izira found his gaze drawn repeatedly to the human. Commander Ixu's warning echoed unbidden in his mind.
He never broke, never revealed his purpose.
But such concerns were irrational, Izira reassured himself. The human wouldn't betray them, couldn't betray them. They represented his only chance to restore his species. Izira had studied Leonard's psychological profile exhaustively. The human exhibited extreme loyalty to his kind, a dedication that bordered on the fanatical. Every analysis indicated he would sacrifice anything, including his own life, to secure humanity's future. "Admiral!" called out the sensor officer, her voice cutting through Izira's thoughts. "Spatial disturbance detected at coordinates 73 Mark 8. Yadric signatures confirmed." The holographic display flickered as new data streamed in. Red markers representing the Yadric fleet began appearing, dropping out of faster-than-light travel and into real space. As each ship materialized, it immediately moved into defensive formation around the shipyard.
They knew we were coming,
Admiral Veklar muttered, his facial ridges darkening with concern. It was expected, Izira replied, projecting confidence he didn't entirely feel. But we have the human. Below them, Leonard's eyes were closed, his breathing steady as the neural interface fed tactical data directly into his consciousness. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, an expression Izira couldn't interpret.
"All ships, battle stations,"
ordered Admiral Veklar.
"Prepare to engage on my mark."
The Yadrik ships continued to arrive, their numbers growing beyond initial intelligence estimates. The mood on the bridge darkened as the enemy force swelled to nearly twice the expected size.
"Human controller,"
Veklar addressed Leonard formally.
"Adjust your squadron to intercept Pattern Delta. We need to thin their numbers before the main fleet engages."
Leonard made no verbal response, but on the tactical display, his 50 ships began to accelerate, shifting formation with a grace that no Krydar battle group could match. They moved like a school of fish, organic and fluid, racing toward the enemy with perfect coordination. Izira gripped the railing of the command platform, his knuckles paling as the distance closed. Everything depended on this moment. The survival of the Krydar species, his own political future, and even the promised resurrection of humanity, something he might or might not honor, depending on many variables. The first shots were fired as Leonard's vanguard came within range of the Yadrik defensive line. Energy weapons flashed across the void, the battle beginning in earnest. On the tactical displays, the green markers of Krydar ships darted between enemy formations with great precision, evading fire while delivering devastating counterattacks. And then, something changed. Leonard's eyes snapped open, no longer focused on the battle but staring directly at Izira. The smile that had played at his lips widened into something predatory and knowing. Through the neural interface, he remained in perfect control of his 50 warships, but his attention had diverged from the battle. "Administrator Izira," he said, his voice carrying easily over the chaos of the command bridge. "I think it's time we discuss those new terms." "What do you mean, new terms?" Izira's voice cracked, betraying the panic rising within him. All around them, the command bridge erupted in confusion as officers registered the humans' words amid the chaos of battle. On the tactical display, the 50 Krydar ships under Leonard's control suddenly slowed their advance, maintaining position just beyond the Yadrik defensive line. The main fleet continued forward for several seconds before Admiral Veklar barked orders to halt their advance as well, leaving the battle formation disjointed and vulnerable. "What are you doing?" Izira hissed, descending from the command platform to stand before Leonard's neural integration chair. "The entire fleet is exposed! We'll all die if you don't continue the attack!" Leonard's face split into a terrifying grin, his eyes alight with something that bordered on madness. A laugh escaped him, not the nervous chuckle of anxiety before battle, but the unhinged sound of someone savoring a long-awaited revenge. "Don't you see the irony, Administrator?" Leonard's voice was calm despite his manic expression. "The fate of your entire species now rests in the hands of the last survivor of a civilization your people helped destroy." On the tactical display, several of Leonard's ships began to move in erratic patterns, dancing just outside the Yadrik weapons range, provoking but not engaging, like a predator toying with its prey. "No one gets anything if we lose this battle!" Izira shouted, facial ridges flushing deep purple with rage and fear. "Not the Krydar, not the memory of humanity. Everything ends if the Yadriks win." Leonard tilted his head, the neural helmet shifting slightly with the movement. "You still don't understand," he said, his voice almost gentle. "This was never about winning a war for you." Another ship darted forward, drawing Yadrik fire before retreating, the maneuver so precise it avoided all damage while forcing the enemy to expend energy on their weapons. A game. He was playing a game while their lives hung in the balance. Admiral Veklar stepped forward, mandibles clicking in a display of fury.
We still command 2/3 of the fleet, he growled. We don't need you.
Izira nodded, desperation driving him to extremes. It would be easier to put a bullet in your head than continue this charade, he threatened, hand moving to the ceremonial sidearm at his hip, a gesture more symbolic than practical, but the only card he had left to play. Leonard laughed again, louder this time. That's the thing, he said, eyes gleaming with triumph. You lost the moment you gave me access to the interface. Before anyone could react, Leonard's body began to convulse violently. The neural helmet sparked and sizzled against his skull as his limbs thrashed against the restraints of the integration chair. Blood trickled from his nose, then from his ears, and finally from the corners of his eyes, crimson tears streaming down his face. "He's killing himself!" shouted Chief Technician Zovri, rushing forward with a medical kit. "Some kind of neural feedback loop!" The bridge erupted in chaos as medical personnel swarmed towards the integration chair. Izira stood frozen, watching in horror as the human's body continued its grotesque dance of death. A final, violent arch of his spine, a guttural scream that seemed to contain centuries of pain and rage, and then stillness. Leonard's body slumped in the chair, eyes empty, blood still seeping from various orifices. "Vital signs negative," reported a medical officer, scanner hovering over the human's chest. "He's gone." A stunned silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the insistent beeping of tactical alerts. The Yadric fleet was regrouping, preparing to capitalize on the Krydar's momentary disarray. "We've lost control of his ships," reported an officer from the tactical station, voice tight with panic. "All 50 vessels are drifting! Systems offline!" Izira felt the crushing weight of failure descending upon him. His career, his species' survival, everything collapsing in an instant because of a human's final act of defiance. Then, impossibly, every ship in the tactical projection turned green at once. A holographic image flickered to life in the center of the command bridge, a perfect, translucent representation of Leonard, standing tall and unbloodied, a strong contrast to his corpse still slumped in the integration chair. "There were a few tricks humanity never showed your species," the apparition said, its voice echoing strangely through the bridge speakers. "This was our last resort, installed in the neural interfaces your kind so eagerly copied from our technology. Full virtualization of the mind." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. Izira stared in disbelief, unable to process what he was witnessing. "Impossible," whispered Zovri, her mind rebelling against the sight before her. "How are you controlling the other ships? The neural link was severed when your body died." The holographic Leonard smiled, the expression chilling in its serenity. "The interface is programmed to allow control to the highest-ranked human present," he explained, as though reciting from a technical manual. "Given my status as the last human, it was easy to convince the AI that I was qualified. Now I exist within the system itself, dispersed across the entire fleet." Izira found his voice at last. "What will you do now?" he asked hoarsely. "Can you live forever like this?" Leonard laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally. "No, nothing so dramatic. I have a few hours at most before the virtualization degrades beyond recovery." His translucent eyes fixed on Izira. "But that's more than enough time to accomplish all I need to." What followed was less a battle than a massacre. The entire Krydar fleet, not just the 50 ships initially assigned to Leonard, but all 150 vessels, moved with supernatural coordination. Ships that had operated independently for centuries suddenly responded to commands from the virtualized human, their Krydar crews finding themselves passengers rather than pilots as control systems locked them out. The Yadric defensive formation, impressive in its numbers, crumbled under the onslaught. Leonard deployed tactics that seemed impossible, moving ships through gaps that barely existed, coordinating fire with millisecond precision, predicting enemy maneuvers before they began. On the flagship's bridge, Frantic attempts to regain control proved futile. Engineers and technicians worked desperately at command consoles, only to be locked out of system after system. Admiral Veklar ordered manual overrides, emergency shutdowns, even physical severing of communication lines between ships, all to no avail.
The neural interface protocols override everything,
Zovri explained, her voice hollow with defeat.
They were designed that way, to ensure seamless control even if conventional systems failed.
From his holographic presence at the center of the bridge, Leonard directed the battle with casual ease, as though orchestrating a simple melody, rather than the complex symphony of fleet warfare. His translucent form gestured occasionally, bringing up tactical overlays or zooming in on particular engagement zones, but mostly he stood still, eyes half closed in concentration. The Yadric ships, despite their numerical advantage, fell one by one. Some attempted to retreat, breaking formation and accelerating toward the outer system, but Leonard's controlled vessels pursued with relentless efficiency, cutting off escape vectors and eliminating stragglers. In less than an hour, it was over. The shipyard, their original target, had been reduced to scattered debris drifting among the asteroids. Not a single Yadric vessel remained intact, an outcome that should have been cause for celebration, but instead left the Krydar officers watching in stunned silence.
"That was almost disappointingly easy,"
Leonard remarked, his holographic form turning to face Izira.
"Your species might have won this war centuries ago if you'd figured out how to properly use the technology we shared with you."
Izira stared at the tactical display, trying to process the implications of what he had just witnessed. "Will you keep your end of our bargain?" he asked tentatively. Leonard laughed, the sound echoing strangely through the bridge's communication systems.
"What do you think?"
"You'll be dead soon," Izira reminded him, an edge of desperation in his voice. "Your virtualization will degrade. You said so yourself."
"I did say that, didn't I?"
Leonard's holographic face wore an expression of mock thoughtfulness.
"And I'm afraid I'll be keeping that appointment."
A junior communications officer suddenly called out from her station, voice tight with alarm.
"Sir, the human is transmitting something through the FTL communications array. The target coordinates are unknown. They don't correspond to any registered system or relay."
Izira whirled to face the hologram. "What are you doing? What mission are you completing now? The same one from before your capture?" For the first time, Leonard's smile seemed genuine rather than predatory.
"Yeah," he said simply, "and I've just received acknowledgement that the old systems are still functional after all this time."
Fear of the unknown gripped Izira, a cold weight in his stomach. "What systems?" he demanded, not expecting an answer. To his surprise, Leonard's expression softened.
"It doesn't matter now, but I suppose I can tell you. Consider it a last wish, like a final meal before execution."
Izira didn't understand the reference, but he remained silent, waiting.
"Humanity had one last great project,"
Leonard explained, his holographic form beginning to flicker slightly at the edges, the first sign of degradation.
"It was halted due to ethical concerns, but contingency protocols were established in case of extinction-level events."
His voice took on a lecturer's tone, as though explaining a simple concept to a student.
"I just activated the emergency clone propagation system on 20 hidden outposts scattered throughout the galaxy."
The implications hit Izira like a physical blow. "Clone propagation?" Leonard nodded.
"Thousands of volunteer genetic templates, flash-grown in automated facilities, complete with neural imprints of essential knowledge."
His flickering form spread its arms in a gesture that encompassed the stars beyond the bridge viewport.
"Humanity doesn't need your help to return. We prefer to do so under our own terms."
A stunned silence fell over the bridge as the Krydar officers began to process this revelation. Admiral Veklar was the first to recover, already thinking tactically.
"We need to locate these outposts immediately,"
he declared, turning to his strategic officer.
If we can't find them all quickly, we'll need to divert resources from containing the remaining Yadric forces. The shipyard wasn't there only.
I wouldn't worry about that, Leonard interrupted, his voice taking on a distant quality. On the tactical display, the green markers representing Krydar's ships began moving again, not in formation, but on collision courses with each other. Horror dawned on Izira's face as he watched vessel after vessel impact another, explosions blooming silently in the vacuum of space.
"What are you doing?"
he whispered. "This is payback," Leonard said simply. "For the torture, for the betrayal, for everything your kind has done not just to humanity, but to every species that trusted you." His holographic form was deteriorating rapidly now, pixelating at the edges, voice distorting. "The galactic stage deserves a reset. Time for everyone to rebuild." More ships collided, their destruction painting the tactical display with blossoms of amber and crimson. Izira watched numbly as the fleet they had spent decades building disappeared in moments of destructive fury.
"You're insane,"
Admiral Veklar breathed, mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. "Perhaps," Leonard agreed, his form now barely recognizable as humanoid. "But I'm also thorough." On the display, the remaining ships changed course, all converging on a single point, the flagship's position. Leonard's laughter, distorted and inhuman, filled the bridge as the first impact rocked the massive vessel. Warning klaxons blared as structural integrity alerts flashed across every console. The second impact came seconds later, more devastating than the first. As the bridge disintegrated around him, consoles exploding and hull plates tearing away into the vacuum, Izira's last sight was Leonard's fragmented hologram, still laughing as the darkness closed in. His world went black, and with it, the last hope for the Krydar Empire. Somewhere in the void, 20 outposts powered themselves into active status, beginning the process of rebuilding a civilization that the galaxy had thought long extinct. Humanity would return, but this time there would be no alliances with species who had proved themselves unworthy of trust. This time, humanity would stand alone and rebuild, then fight.